What's up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York. We are officially back. Thank you so much for your patience, and we returned with an awesome guest. For the first time in 4 years, we returned with Sylvaine. Great to be able to talk with you. Thank you so much. I can't believe it's been 4 years since we spoke during lockdown.
Yeah, that's incredible, isn't it? Lockdown was 4 years ago. That's kind of hard to imagine already.
Yeah, I
But
realized.
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. It's so awesome to have you back, and it's great to have an artist who I personally admire as sort of like the comeback interview for this channel. So it's great to be able to sort of hit the ground running. And a lot has happened since I spoke to you with the release of Nova in 2022, which we'll get to. But we also have this new EP, which forgive if I destroy this, but Eg Er Framand, if I did that okay.
Yeah,
All right.
that's good.
There's no way I was rehearsing that for like an hour before this interview, just heads up. But
We just like nailed it. Like, yeah, sure.
But with this being an EP, is this kind of meant to like hold the listeners over and while we wait for sort of like a full-length follow-up to Nova, or does it sort of connect in your catalog the same way that Nova and Atoms Align, Coming Undone, etc.?
For me, I think it's actually, if we look at the emotional and like kind of the inspiration and the kind of story behind the content behind this EP, I think it's the natural continuation of Nova actually, because Nova kind of represented the death of an era, or the death of something, like the loss of something, and the beginning of the rebirth. Whereas I feel like Eg Er Framand kind of represents the rebirth and kind of the liberation that brings with it. Somewhat at least. So for me, it's actually like a natural continuation, even if I know that the musical sound is very different from Nova, maybe relating to the title track of Nova, but otherwise it's very specific because there's a concept behind this EP. I chose to make it an EP because it is kind of exploring some territory that I haven't been with my kind of regular releases. So it just feels like EPs are like, I don't know, they seem to be the format where it's kind of accepted to spread your wings and like, other places than what you're usually doing. So I decided to keep it an EP, even though technically if I added one more track, it would be a full-length album because the EP is already like a half an hour long. But yeah, it's not supposed to be like kind of just like a, here you go, have this while you wait. For me, it's like I'm taking it as seriously as any other full album release. And it's just another step forward in the same kind of story that Nova was starting or like continuing from the previous releases.
If somebody could be discovering Sylvaine for the first time off this EP, do you recommend that maybe they listen to Nova first before diving into this EP in a way? Could there be something that they'd be missing story-wise? Or is it open enough to interpretation where they could, approach this EP versus Nova like in any of their own way?
I absolutely have not thought about that. That's a good question. I'm not sure they would be missing anything if they started with the EP. They might be disappointed if they go back and listen to other things and realize that this is not my usual sound, because folk or Norwegian folk music has always been an inspirational source and always kind of like you find traces of it here and there throughout all of my releases. But it's never been as purely dominated by the sound of Norwegian folk music as this EP has. So if we're talking about the story behind it and the meaning behind it and how it relates to the Sylvain universe, I think it relates to it just as fine as any other release. And I'm not sure it's not that much of a concept that there's a story that that follows. My releases are kind of more of like an audio diary. I just see from the outside that I think that Eg Er Framand actually, even if it's a concept EP in the sense that I'm trying to pay homage to my Norwegian musical roots, it still has a continuation of the story of Nova. So maybe it wasn't something that I did completely consciously, but it happened that way because it's still relating to the same subject as like one of the main pillars of Sylvain. So I think they can start with the EP and it should be fine. Like, yeah, I think it would be possible.
It could the meaning of I close my eyes so I can see off of Nova, was that at all maybe sort of like expressing this artistic process in a way? Because the melody behind it just, when I listen to that melody, because you have something as melancholy as Nowhere Still Somewhere, which still gives me goosebumps every time I listen to that song. But I close my eyes so I could see it. Almost that to me has the essence of rebirth or sort of like inner discovery in a way. So has that song almost kind of been like a documentary on your creative process?
I mean, I think it's definitely, that's the part of like the kind of rebirth thing that I feel in Nova, because Nova is Nova is, how do you talk about that? Basically, like I said, kind of dedicated to the end of an era or the death of something. But you have those like little moments of, you can feel what comes next. And I think I close my eyes so I can see definitely is a part of that, and also a very much a way to describe exactly like you said, my creative process. Like using, how can I say that? It's kind of like a self-preservation method too, I guess, to try to kind of go within when this world becomes too heavy to bear, to maybe create art, which is a way to express and get things out, and to find some kind of at least temporary peace in existence that can be very heavy and overwhelming. So yeah, maybe that's a good way to put it, actually.
Was Nowhere Still Somewhere? Because I don't, I mean, not to assume or anything, but that was, I remember because when you released Nova, it was around the time that the invasion of Ukraine happened. So that's when I like first heard it. And like, it really, like, I was listening to that as I felt like the world was sort of like falling apart. That's my experience with it. It's an amazing song, by the way. That doesn't diminish how good it is. But like, I was just wondering, has that come from a sort of darker place? As Because it sounds very melancholy. Did that come from a very personal melancholy experience for you?
Absolutely. Nova as a whole, as a record, definitely was born out of like probably the hardest period I had in my life so far. And I always say that that's within the back of my mind, thinking that I'm an extremely privileged individual that has not had as much hard times or as much resistance and like, extreme cases of despair in my life. So I know that. But nevertheless, for me personally, it was a really hard period that I was going through in 2019, 2020. And that definitely colored Nova. There's no doubt. Nova was writing Nova, recording Nova, then promoting it became a big part of the catharsis of letting go of this loss and like kind of again transitioning into something else, a new era. And you can definitely feel that in the record. Like I said, it's dedicated to loss, and loss is inevitably very melancholic and very something that's very hard to deal with, is overwhelming. But again, loss always means this something new can be gained. When one door closes, another opens, that kind of thing. So I like to believe that there's still a lot of light in Nova as a record, even if I do think it's really sad, if I'm honest, the album. Like some of the songs still now breaks my heart when I listen to it, because it brings me back to the moment I was writing the songs and what I was trying to express with them. Like, for example, I've always used this one as an example because it's the song that I've written that's the hardest for me to play. Because of that, it's Everything Must Come to an End. I played it once in my life. I actually dared to play it once live in Oslo on a tour that we did about 4 months ago in Scandinavia. And I totally broke down on stage afterwards. So definitely, I mean, there's a definite melancholy, sad, dark, overwhelmed human being, broken human being vibe on that record. But definitely specks of light and kind of hope of what's to come from that loss as well.
And because I feel like that melancholy, you have a way of making melancholia so beautiful in a way, because you see like a lot of doom bands. Like, I'm a huge fan of Catatonia, for example. Their music is very beautiful in a way, but then you take a band that's very doomy and very melancholy, like Candlemass, for example. I've called their music many things, but I wouldn't necessarily call it like beautiful in the way where it's like serenading. It's dusty, it's raw, it's crunchy in a way. So like, I feel like that there's many different ways to express this melancholia. But when it comes to melancholy, obviously there's the famous saying, when we are at our worst, art is at its best. And I think that's it's a great duality, but I feel like it's also cruel. Has the songwriting process for you been just as deteriorating as it can be cathartic?
Absolutely. I think I was just speaking to another artist about this literally last week, and it's definitely a difficult process. It's something where you have to start, like, you have to go beyond the surface, and you have to keep digging and keep digging and keep digging into the stuff that you might not actually want to be digging in, but that's the kind of things that you kind of need to put into your art sometimes, not always for some people, because it's kind of a part of your self-therapy, and also just being honest and authentic. Like, if you're not being if you're not able to dig in those deepest parts and put your hands on the darkest spots inside of your soul that you might be afraid of to kind of, bring up the surface, then I feel like it's hard to stay 100% authentic and to be honest in your music. I don't like the term bad or good or like negative or positive emotions. I think all emotions are the same, and basically bringing them up to the surface kind of takes away their power a bit too. So if you have the ability to kind of marry the light and the dark within you and let them all kind of come to the surface, I think it can make you a more balanced person in everyday life. I also think, by the way, that I absolutely hate this romanticization, the sentence that you just said, that's when you're at your worst, the art is the best. Even though, of course, there's definitely truth in it. Like when we feel bad, sometimes we have a lot to say. But I really hate, I think it's super toxic, actually, this romanticization of like depression and feeling like super low and crap. And that's when we can make gold, in art. For me, I can't write music when I'm actually depressed. I write lyrics, but in the end I end up reading the lyrics after, and it's so dark that I don't want to put this out into the world because it doesn't feel like me. It feels like how can you say, that kind of other being, the depression, whatever, that's speaking, and it's not really who I am authentically. So I see what you mean, and it's definitely true that when you have big experiences, good or bad, so called, you always grow, and it teaches you a lot about yourself as a human being, and that gives you things to say. When you're really down in the dumps, for some people, maybe that's their sweet spot for creativity. For me, it's never been. So I kind of tend to be a bit like, we shouldn't romanticize that too much. I think this like suffering artist thing is a bit dangerous.
I couldn't agree with you more. Like, for instance, one of my favorite bands in black metal of all time, Life Lover. I mean, they're they romanticize the hell out of some of the darkest aspects that come from within. But Kim Carlson, B, and everybody else in that band, they were actually feeling that, but it almost seems like that they were deliberately seeking that out. They were deliberately looking for that negativity in a way. And then you have I think one of the most heartbreaking albums, Dreaming Neon Black by Nevermore, that was a tragedy that occurred in Warrell Dane's life, that he didn't look for that, he didn't ask for it. So I feel like that there is an essence of, can you seek out emotions, or does it just kind of have to strike you?
I mean, I think both, I guess, but I think that's... First, I think that in art, there are no rules. I've always said that I think the only rules that apply are to really process your emotions and try to express them instead of trying to pretend like you're expressing certain emotions. For example, this kind of like, I'm in a doom band, it's supposed to be heavy and sad, so let's write things about sad stuff. Not that you're feeling it, but that that's kind of what goes with the genre. That's not good, obviously. But if you're expressing this authentic emotion, whatever emotion it is, that's the main thing. I guess sometimes they can go hand in hand, is that you kind of seek to be around a certain kind of feeling that you like, for example, in music or in art, that can kind of fuel your emotional fire. But in general, I think there are no rules, actually. I think that's the best answer, is there are no rules. Yeah. Just trying to stay authentic and expressing things without overthinking or overanalyzing or like calculatingly trying to do something is probably the best, I would say.
And speaking of EP, there is one EP that I also very much loved, and or split, whatever you call it, but it's the split that you did with Unrequited, however you pronounce that one too.
I say Unrequited. I don't even know. I don't know.
I interviewed him last year, or like in the fall, like right when they were on tour with Ghost Bath and Harakiri for the Sky. Great time. And I literally had to ask him like 1,000 times, how do you say it again? How do you say it again? But that EP I also thought was very magical, as I thought it really brought in its own atmosphere, and you could tell whose song was who on there. But when collaborating with another artist, do you almost kind of have to be in the same headspace or kind of feel the same emotion to make it sound like that those songs belong together,
I mean, I think if you're lending your instrument, whatever it is, to an actual where you're recording on top of something that already exists, where there is an emotional landscape that's there, I think it's really important as a guest performer that you try to respect. And even if you can't relate 100%, you can try to understand and try to channel it in your way. So I guess that's the kind of the sense of like trying to feel an emotion instead of like, actually feeling it. This is the case, I guess, where you have to try to kind of get into that sphere. But if you're doing like we did with the splits, where you have like two individuals that are creating their own things, but then you put it together, I don't think either of us actually was too much like considering what the other one was doing when we did the split. We just kind of wanted to explore a bit of a different territory, both of us, and then we just put those together. And then I did some vocals on one of his tracks, and even if it's like very different, it kind of worked somehow, because I think the overall ambience and the emotional quality actually turned out to be relatable. So yes, I think if you're doing something that's in an already existing sphere, you have to be respectful and try to channel the emotions that are already present in your way. If you're doing a split like that, it's great. If you have the link, of course, that's the best thing for the listener. Then it's not like two separate units just tied together, but you actually like interweave it. Then of course it's cool if that happens. But in our case, I have to admit that we didn't actually plan that. It just kind of works out.
Well, what about the song that you did with Mole off of the Diorama album? Because it didn't have to say featuring Sylvaine to know that was your voice on there. Maybe it's because I've listened to your music for many years now, but that also, because Mole is, I would say, very, very heavier and almost kind of retro-y in a way. There's definitely cross in the genre, but there's also a lot of differences. So did you almost kind of have to put yourself in a different headspace for that particular track as well?
I feel like this from the moment I listened to that track, I just felt connected to it. Like I felt like it has that like really shoegazy thing going for it. Like a lot of music that I love to listen to, I could like kind of feel in this track. And with the lyrics and everything, it just became really easy for me to slip in to that sphere. And talking to the guys too, like I actually did this song with them on stage last year at Copenhagen in Copenhagen. And it was so nice. Like it was a really emotional experience, actually, especially for the singer Kim and I. It was like became very apparent that it was easy for both of us to relate to what the other one was trying to say. Although I was initially just trying to tell his story in my way. So actually, it wasn't that much of a challenge. It felt kind of like very familiar and kind of at home, even though it was definitely in parts way harsher than what I'm doing and a very kind of different sound sometimes. It was still very familiar, so it worked well. And that's also something that when I say yes to do guest vocals or guest performances, it's usually, or it's only so far been with projects where I listen to the song and I'm like, I feel something here that's like it's igniting something in me, or I feel at home, it feels familiar. And I think that it can actually, what I can do can add something. Because obviously I will never be a part of a track just to be a part of it. It has to bring something positive, or else, there's no point. So yeah, I try to only say yes to do stuff like that when I really feel the music and I feel familiar with it. And I feel like I can also express the emotion here, even though it's not really my story to tell.
Do you feel that everything you make, whether it's your own stuff or people that you collaborate with, because I've always said that art is life in itself, and it can grow and it can develop, it could even die sometimes too, with how we change all the time and the art changes with us. So do you want everything that you create to be representative of who you are at that time? Do you want Nova to just be representative of that dark period, or do you want like maybe the art to evolve with you and grow with you as you evolve?
I actually think it's super beautiful in music how, if you have the kind of approach that I do, where it's kind of like an audio diary sort of thing, which is very common for a lot of artists to do it that way. I think I really love the concept of it being kind of like a little picture frozen in time of who you were at that moment in time and the life you were living then and how you were feeling, what you were thinking, what you were going through. So of course, I think those two kind of go together, actually. I think that you have each album obviously is that frozen picture in time that represents you, and that's it. But at the same time, it's a part of also the next one that will be an evolution, hopefully, and it just keeps evolving. But in general, I like to think of it as like, little still photos or little videos, whatever you want to call it, of that person that I was at that moment in time. And try to leave it at that, because I think you can always go back and be like, I should have done this. You can change it forever and always. But just seeing it as like, this is a testament of who I was then. I like that idea. So that's kind of how I see it.
And I think everybody is, gonna have their own experience with it. Like, for instance, I didn't discover Adam's Align Coming Undone till maybe like a year or two after it came out. So when I listen to that album, I'm saying it's taking me back to 2019, not 2018. Yeah. And I'm sure when you listen to that material, because you were writing it before then, that's taking you back to 2016 or 2017. I feel like music in itself is the perfect representation to show how time is relative.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. It's not. Yeah, exactly. It's relative. So yeah, that's a good point.
Do you believe that the context or the meaning? You mentioned that it's an audio diary of who you are at that particular time, but as we interpret it and experience it in our own way, and you bring this live and share with people, do you think that adds another layer of meaning to it?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. In that sense, it is ever evolving, actually, even the past stuff, because we're always bringing it back to life on stage. So even if it's not the recorded versions are, maybe I should have specified that, the recorded versions are like little pictures in time of who I was at a certain moment. Whereas the music itself lives on for, well, forever. I hope so. We'll see how long it lasts on stage as well. But definitely, as we play it, it gives new meaning. And it's funny how sometimes you'll write about a song about a certain subject that relates super strong to something you're going through then, and then like 5 years later you're going through something different, but it's still exactly like, super relatable in a different angle. So absolutely, meaning changes over time. And the music itself, I guess, is ever evolving because it's ephemeral. When we do it on stage, it's here and now, then it's gone. And the next time it will always be different. But the recorded versions are those like little captures of that moment in time, I guess. So it's both, I guess.
But when you have to, work on a song for multiple days or weeks, or, take multiple takes in the studio or something like that, do you find it harder to sort of maintain the initial emotion that sparked the idea?
Absolutely. I think every musician, maybe not every, but many musicians will fight that, because you have to find the balance between the emotional expression, which for me is always what dominates, is always the most important. Without that, there is nothing, kind of thing. But at the same time, you want, usually you have a certain level of technical execution that you want to hit. And sometimes they don't always appear at the same time, we have to be honest. So yeah, it's the studio is like it's kind of a strange process, recording stuff, because as you said, you have to kind of try to keep that initial excitement and or inspiration to express really strongly in that moment. So that's why it's really important to take breaks when you're in the studio, and also like to take some steps back and try to be objective. I have this like very strong memory of recording Mørklagt from my second album. No, my third album. I can't even remember anymore. My brain has like left the building.
Oh, I know.
From Adam's Align Coming Undone. And basically, I wasn't quite happy with the vocals, and we went over it, and we got to a place where the take was perfect. Like everything was executed perfectly. Everything was exactly how it was. And I remember sitting there with with Benoit, that was doing the engineering for that one, and we sat there, we listened, and then we like sat there in silence, and we looked at each other, like, but I feel nothing now. And I was like, yeah, I feel absolutely nothing listening to this vocal line anymore. So yeah, you have to find a balance between the emotional and technical contents. And it's definitely challenging to try to keep that spark alive, which is why it's important to kind of stay fresh by taking breaks, or to go over to something else, or do something else, to try to keep it there. But if you wrote the music yourself, you should always be able to kind of tap into that well inside of you that produced this to begin with. So it's really not an impossible task. It just can be a little bit challenging. And the more you do it, the more albums you make, I think the more you get used to your way of working and how you can achieve that as best, capture the right moments.
And you develop a routine basically in the studio. But I feel like the studio, it's either one of the most helpful things, like people get really into their zone when they're in the studio. That it's not a coincidence that most of them are gearheads, but most people, feel at one in the studio, or people just despise being there because it's very static. It's a very controlled, where they can't really get into their element. It's just not their atmosphere in a way. And
exactly.
So I feel like that it is almost a studio mode that you almost have to kind of learn to get yourself into.
Absolutely. That's what I mean. Like if you do it, the more times you do it, I feel the more you get used to it. If it's not your thing, it will never be your thing. But I think you at least you learn how you yourself react in this kind of situation, and what are like your triggers, and what's the best way to achieve the best results emotionally and like technically speaking. So yeah, it's just like a learning process, like anything else. But it's definitely wildly different from the live situation where things are usually maybe not as technically perfect every time, but the emotional quality can be super strong because you have the audience that you're feeding off of and they're feeding off of you, like you have this like energy exchange live. So yeah, they're really different, but I know for me personally, I really like them both. They have very different qualities. And yeah, the more you do it, the more you get to learn about how to do it in the right way for you.
When it comes to your playing, making a set list and creating a set list and bringing all these different songs in together, if you play a Nova song and then do an Adams Alliance song and then maybe play two songs off of this new EP and kind of like go all around the Sylvaine discography, does that also kind of turn into like an emotional roller coaster in a way? Because I feel like when I listen to an album like Nova, again, that's such a spectacular like listening experience in a way that I need to start off with Nova and I need to end with Disillusion. I can't like shuffle it, if you will. So when you're going all along that spectrum, does that also sort of change the emotional energy and what you express behind that music?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a little bit, it can be feel a bit schizophrenic sometimes because, as I said, like, especially the live performance, it really depends on your mindset of the day as well. But sometimes it really brings you back to the moment when you were creating the track. And it's like wildly different to talk about me version of me in 2016 versus the one in 2021. There's not the same person anymore, I would say. Of course, there's some similarities, of course, but still, it definitely is. It is a bit of an emotional roller coaster. But as I said, it's also like because every time we play these songs, it kind of brings new life into them and a different version of that arises. So it also kind of brings them all to like this new plane that they coexist in together, all together. That's kind of detached a bit from who they are, like their personalities 100% on the records. So yes and no, but definitely I can notice that, for example, when we play live, I notice that there's certain songs that make me feel more, I guess I would say, than others. They all make me feel, of course, but there's some of them that just really, there's something there. And Nova, because it's the kind of the last, let's say, era that I've been in album-wise, they still feel kind of new and fresh, and there's still some, what can I say, extra weight in those songs compared to some that, like for example, we play Earthbound from Wistful, which is my second record from 2016, which is like 8 years ago now. So it definitely feels quite different to play something like that. Or when I play my solo shows and I play Silent Chamber, Noisy Heart from my first album, it's definitely a peculiar ride.
Yeah.
But it's always emotional no matter what, and always trying to kind of peel back the layers that we kind of use to protect ourselves, I guess, in everyday life, and give the audience an open view and or path into my soul each time I'm on stage, no matter what songs I'm playing, because that's the beauty of the live setting, is that you can communicate directly with the people that are there, from your soul to theirs. And yeah, it's an emotional roller coaster for everyone involved, I guess.
I can tell you that
So-
it's still an emotional roller coaster for me every time I listen to anything that you've been featured on, and that's why I very much like enjoy the music in a way. I feel like it really is, and it's kind of like a cliche statement to say at this time, but I think that your music is a testament where it almost comforts the disturbed in a way, while also being disturbing the comfort did at the same time. So
That's a nice way to put it.
so before,
Yeah.
so before we go, I want to thank you so much for coming back on the show, and thank you for being the comeback interview for this channel. It's great to be able to be doing this again, especially with an artist that I personally admire. Is there just anything else with Sylvaine that you would like to promote with the release of this new EP, and what we could be expecting from Sylvaine in the near future?
Well, first, I just have to say thank you so much for having me again. It was a real pleasure, and to be the comeback interview feels like a really big honor. So, thank you so much for letting me be the person that you talk to first. Welcome back as well. Here's to many more years. Hopefully, that will be very cool.
Good to be back.
And as far as what I'm up to these days, well, of course, I have my EP coming out on March 22nd. That's dedicated to Norwegian folk music. So it's like my musical heritage on my Norwegian side of the family, which is allowing me to explore completely new domains and some not so new, more familiar domains, which I really hope that people will enjoy, even if it's quite different from what I'm doing in Sylvaine usually. And after that, I will be doing my first like solo tour as like solo on stage, because obviously Sylvain is my solo project, so it's not new in that sense. But to be alone on stage is new. I've only done this a few times. I'm going to be heading out on a tour in October with a great like Faroese artist called Ivor, or Ivor as we say in English. So that's going to be really cool. And meanwhile, during this year, I will be working on the next record, and quite excited for how that's going so far. And it looks like it will once again be a bit of a different beast from the ones that came before. So we shall.
Every record is different, but it's always Sylvain, which is why I very much enjoy going through these different catalogs. When I'm listening to Earthbound and then, go to Atoms Aligned to now, I think it's a real epic journey. I know it's an audio diary for you and it's a real self-portrait of your musical journey, but it has become a journey for us and your listeners. So I think it really is a great experience to have. Thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Sylvain, the new EP, Eg Er Framand. Be sure to pick that up. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.